So welcome again to our webinar today, which is Driving and Memory Loss. And we are happy to have you joining us here at, I say here as if we're in one place. We're happy to have you joining all of us from Alzheimer's San Diego. I'm pleased today to, as always, be co-hosting and co-presenting with Amy Abrams, our Director of Education at Alzheimer's San Diego, and slide advancer extraordinaire.
Yes, I'm multitasking today. Absolutely. Hi, everyone.
So we're happy to be presenting to you folks today. We are equally happy to have with us our colleague, Marcy, who is also a clinical care coach at Alzheimer's San Diego, and she will be our social work support today. Hi, Marcy.
Hi, everyone. I'll be answering some of your chats as well, hopefully.
That's right, and some of you may have
questions and answers.
Talked with Marcy by phone over the months or years. If you've been calling us, she's one of our great folks that are on our family support lines, taking calls and working with clients. All right, here's our agenda for today. We will be talking about how dementia is affecting driver safety and what are the signs of unsafe driving. What do we need to be looking for? And when do we intervene? And really, how do we intervene as well, too? We'll be talking about how we can collaborate with both physicians and the Department of Motor Vehicles. And also importantly, you know, when we're thinking about a day when ourselves or people we love with some type of memory loss might not be driving, we need to have a plan in place. And so we'll be looking at local resources for driver safety, evaluations, and transportation alternatives. So we'll start with how dementia affects driver safety. And so in order to do that, what we want to do is make sure that everyone just has kind of a good basic understanding of what is dementia. We're not going to go into this in detail. If you have questions about dementia and Alzheimer's disease, you can reach out via Q&A and Marcy may be able to assist you. But additionally, we have other webinars that you can watch and participate in if they are live that will give you that good information. And you can always call us as well too at our number that you see on every slide in the bottom right-hand corner for your specific questions about dementia. So dementia is the word that we use to describe the symptoms that are going on that are being caused by some other underlying medical condition. And these symptoms are resulting in impaired cognitive function. They may be causing behavior changes, and they are affecting normal daily life. So, and that last phrase is very important. It's enough to interfere with the normal activities of daily life. So keep that in mind, and keep that in mind in terms of how dementia is impacting driving as well too. So dementia is not any one disease or diagnosis. It can be the result of many different types of disorders or diseases, but the common thread is that it is the changes in cognition and memory and behavior are significant enough to affect daily activities. So how does that affect a driver? Well, memory loss is right up there. And memory loss in driving could be everything from forgetting which pedal on the floor is gas and which pedal is brake. And that does happen. And it can be forgetting where we are in our own neighborhood, getting lost. It can be forgetting to do things like turn on signal lights or turn on headlights or shoulder check, any of those kind of things. As a result of memory loss can be impacting driving. Orientation can also be affected and affecting driving. And again, especially with regards to not knowing exactly where I am. If I'm in my local neighborhood in my Vaughn's store and I don't quite remember how to get home, then, we've got a problem there. Judgment, dementia affects judgment. And when judgment is affected, that is impacting driving. Why? Because we use judgment to estimate things like braking distance, traffic flow and speed, and assessing, do we have enough time to be able to safely get in the other lane before the vehicle that's coming up behind is in my change lane. Behavior can certainly impact driving, and it may be a result of dementia as well too. It may be a matter of just becoming angry with other drivers, blaming other drivers, just not using kind of good driver etiquette because of behavior changes. Sensory changes absolutely do affect driving, and that's everything from reduced and diminished sometimes changes in physical function. What I'm talking about there is everything from being able to have good range of motion, to be able to look over our shoulders and shoulder check, to be lifting up our necks, to be checking in the rear view mirror, that kind of thing. But also auditory wise, to be hearing sirens and knowing we need to pull over to the right side of the road, and to be able to know when those sirens mean to pull over to the right side of the road. So sometimes we might hear a siren and it might be, or what we think is a siren, and maybe it's something that's on the radio or something else. So we also, with sensory changes, are using kind of higher cognitive function to assess those sounds as well too. And then we have narrowing visual field. It's just getting smaller and smaller. That kind of nice range of vision that we have is changing. And with dementia, it's changing significantly and fairly rapidly. And so these are all the things that are going to be impacting a driver in terms of the symptoms of dementia and how that translates into changing driving skills. And we want to give you a little bit of statistics so that you do have a good understanding of the importance of driving in dementia and why it is a public health issue. And so what we know through research is that drivers over the age of 75 have an increased risk of collision for every mile they drive. So if they're on the road a lot, the risk of collision is just going up, up, up. The rate of fatalities increases slightly after age 65. However, it increases significantly after age 75. So, and we see this, we might not always kind of make the connection or be aware of it, but in the news, we hear about car accidents that are occurring, and people after age 75 are often fatalities in those accidents. So that's an important factor for us to be thinking about. And lastly, age is the primary risk factor for developing dementia. And it is affecting 1 in 9 people over the age of 65. And that goes up significantly to about 1 in 3, almost kind of working its way down to 1 in 2 people over the age of 85. So the longer we live, the higher the risk for us to develop dementia and then have all these other higher risk factors with regards to driving as well too. So, this is a concern for all of us. This could be any one of us at any point in time. We put it all together, and it's something that we need to talk about and plan for. So what are the signs of unsafe driving? So what we're going to start with is the signs of unsafe driving that we ourselves may observe in another person, particularly as a passenger. And I can attest to kind of all of these. I think, again, oftentimes of my uncle, he has since passed away, but in his later years, and he was above 85, I'm going to say about in his years, probably 86, 87, I think at 88, he stopped driving. And, we would go and visit, and he liked to drive. He wanted to be, the tour guide and kind of in control. And boy, oh boy, we were starting to see all these things going on with him. His confidence was changing, and he'd always been a very confident driver. He'd been driving all his life, as many people have. We always say all our lives, but for him, he started driving at age 12 or 11 or something like that. But he started showing uncertainty and hesitation, and especially with turning left or turning right. There was this hesitation. And that hesitation led to some fender benders as well, too. Lane control changes, and this is when we see people, either moving around in their lane from one side of the lane to the other, or drifting over into other lanes as well, too. We can see inappropriate speed, and by and large for either our older, and I'm not saying all folks, I'm saying some of our older drivers and our people with dementia who are still driving, we tend to see they're driving at lower speeds. And again, we have all seen some of these folks on the highway, probably more so pre-COVID when we were doing more driving. But this might be, the gentleman that's plugging along, he's in the slow lane, but he's still going too slow for the slow lane because he's only going 35, 40 miles an hour. That's unsafe. We start seeing trouble navigating turns, and often what we're seeing happening is people are hitting the curbs. So we're starting to see, maybe potentially tire damage, but also damage to the hubcaps. Becoming easily angered, confused, or distracted, particularly on any transition lanes or on and off ramps or going in or out of parking lots where there's a lot going on and our brains need to be really on top of things to sort through all the information. And this is when we can see people, just getting upset because it's a little bit overwhelming and they're not entirely certain what to do. And of course, making poor decisions is another sign that we will see. And this can be poor decisions about everything from the speed you're going at, the rate of speed, braking distance, when to go and when not to go, that hesitation. We have to make driving decisions in a split moment, whether we're going to do this or not. And slower response times is happening as well too. People with dementia are processing information at a slower rate. I mean, we all are as we're growing older. However, people with dementia are having more challenges with processing information. And so reaction time is slower. And then we're starting to see errors at intersections about who goes and who doesn't goes and stopping and yielding and that kind of thing. So these are the signs that you might observe as a passenger. And again, I'll just say, really, we saw all those things with my uncle at some point in time. What are some other signs? These are the things that you might observe passively just by, being a family member that sees how your person living with memory loss is parking in the driveway or in the garage or whatever it might be. We might see parking inappropriately. So that could be everything from going too far into the garage and hitting the nose of the car against the wall of the garage. It could be parking at strange and odd angles in some of our, in the parking lots, in the at the grocery store, whoever it may be. That's those cars that you sometimes see. It's like, wow, they're like taking 2 parking spots there. We may see new dings or scratches, and that was certainly something we saw with my uncle with his vehicle. It seemed like every time after he'd been out, he'd come home and there would be a new ding. So, and then reports of near misses or close calls. And, and oftentimes if they are reporting this, they're blaming it on other drivers as well, too. There may be other drivers frequently honking horns. Usually, my experience has been as if another driver is honking his horn and you realize it's at you, you've done something, either etiquette wise or drive skill wise. And so if that's happening fairly often, that's probably a sign that, I'm not saying that some memory loss is going on, but that there's a change in your driving skills for sure. Forgetting how to locate familiar places. So this would be things like trying to go to my local grocery store and missing the turn for it and forgetting just exactly how to get there or forgetting how to get home. And yes, returning from a routine drive later than usual. And we unfortunately have seen this as well too, where we get calls from families that, their person went out to just do a quick chore in the neighborhood, and by George, 3, 4, 5 hours went by, and it's because they were lost, driving around and lost. So what else do we see here with driving is wandering. So, we know that everybody with a diagnosis of some type of dementia are at risk for wandering. And a majority of them will wander or become lost at some point in time. Up 60% is the statistic we have. And, I feel that that's underreported. I think it's probably much higher. But it is important to understand that can happen not only on foot, but by vehicle, and it can be long or short distances. And I always say to Amy, if I had a dime for every time I had a family member say, oh, well, my person has never wandered before. If I had a dime for every time I heard that, I'd be pretty good. I'd have a nice size saving account. And, nobody wanders until the point that they wander. So the fact that your person hasn't wandered to this point in time is no kind of guarantee they will never wander. We do know a majority of people do wander at some point in time. And, statements like he's lived in this neighborhood for over 30 years, he knows his way home, or I make sure she tells me where she is going, is all fine and dandy, but that doesn't speak to what is going on in terms of the dementia in the brain and the fact that people do become disoriented and confused. They do have memories of past activities. They may have physical needs or discomfort on the road and going to do a chore of some kind, and all of a sudden I realize I really need to use the bathroom. So I need to find a place to pull into, a gas station or something so I can use the bathroom. And lo and behold, I'm off track from my original plan, and now I'm lost. And it may be agitation or restlessness as well too. I have unfortunately worked with many families that have had some wandering incidences. And I think often of a couple I worked with lived in Oceanside, and the wife got up in the morning and her husband, living with dementia, was gone, and their car was gone. And so she called the police and 911, and they were out searching for him. He ended up being gone, if I recall correctly. I think it was maybe about 24 hours. He had got in the car and he had driven all the way down to the border. He actually went across the border into Tijuana. He had an accident. And at the time of the accident, He appeared kind of confused and disoriented, and a nice Good Samaritan couple stopped and talked to him, realized he was an American citizen, and there was something going on with him, and they very kindly drove him back to the border and released him to the Border Patrol. And, he was able then to get home and reunited with his wife. But I can tell you it was a terrible many hours for that particular family, not knowing where he was. So we need to stop for a moment. And, if what we've talked about to this point in time in the webinar is making it clear to you that perhaps you, or perhaps someone and care about, needs to stop driving, what should you do next? What are the next steps? And so, we need to rethink and assess our driving, or perhaps their driving. And oftentimes it's really good to get an objective opinion, because in the words of the great Dave Barry, this is absolutely true. The one thing that unites all human beings, regardless of age, gender, religion, economic status, or ethnic background, is that deep down inside, we all believe we are above average drivers. And that is the absolute truth. And I know it is in myself as well, too. We tend to think, and I know it is for my husband too, as the two of us are going along, he'll be driving, we're critical of other people's driving skills or lack thereof. And we talk as if we're the best drivers on the road. And I'm not so sure that we are, but that's how we talk. So I think this absolutely rings true. So we want to stop, I think, for a minute. And Amy, I think, are you going to chime in here? And
Sure am.
We're going to do something for our folks?
Yes, we are. I'm going to talk next for a little bit here about collaborating with doctors and the Department of Motor Vehicles. Before we do, I am, hopefully, if everything's going smoothly here, I have just launched a little poll. We'd like to sort of see what you know about how things work with the DMV. Is this true or false? Your answers, by the way, are anonymous. We don't know who's answered correctly and incorrectly, but true or false, when a person is diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease or some other form of dementia in California, they lose their driving privileges. Do you think that that's true or false? Give you just a minute to.
Numbers are changing a little bit.
Right, just a few more seconds here. If you haven't voted yet or answered the poll, it's not a vote. There's a clear answer here. Okay, great. Okay, I'll go ahead and close it so you can see what the results are. Hopefully you see that.
Yep.
So 38% of you said that it's true, and 62%, about a third and 2/3, 2/3 or so said that it is false. When a person is diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease or dementia in California, they lose their driving privileges. And that is the correct answer. It's false, but this is a tricky question, and we're going to talk about why that is. I'm going to stop sharing those, and hopefully the window is out of your view. If it isn't, just exit out and it will disappear. But thank you. Thanks for participating in that. We'll talk about the nuances of the answer to that question as we go along here. First, we'll start by talking about working with the physician. So What's really important to understand about, and by the way, we're in California here at Alzheimer's San Diego. We recognize that there are very likely participants on this webinar who are not in the state of California. So you do need to get familiar with your own Department of Motor Vehicles and the laws in your area. But this is fairly universally true across the country. Here in California, it is a person's ability to drive that determines whether or not they have driving privileges, not the fact that they have a diagnosis. That gets tricky. That's why that answer is false, but it gets tricky because we do have a law here in California wherein when a physician makes a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease or any other form of dementia, what the DMV refers to as a dementing illness. This could be Lewy body dementia, frontotemporal dementia, even mild cognitive impairment in many cases. That physician is mandated by law to make a report to, it doesn't actually go directly to the Department of Motor Vehicles. It goes to the county Department of Public Health. And then from there, it sort of gets moved on to the Department of Motor Vehicles. But sort of conversationally, the way we generally describe that is the doctor making a report to the DMV, because we all understand that that's the end result of what happens there. It's a report to the DMV. It is not a revocation of driving privileges. As we'll talk about here as we go along, driving privileges can only be revoked by a DMV or by law enforcement. But that's not to say that physicians can't and don't make strong recommendations to their patients that they think that they should stop driving. And absolutely, we believe that if a physician has told you or the person that you care for that you should stop driving, you should stop driving. Right? I'll come back to that point here in a moment. So that's why it gets a little bit tricky, because we know that that law exists. And to be honest, that law is the reason that a lot of people resist getting screening. They resist getting diagnosis because they're so fearful that that means losing driving privileges. But the reality of that is what that does is triggers the DMV to respond in some way, either to retest the person, to reevaluate them, or if the doctor's recommendation in that report is very strong, this person has, moderate symptoms of Alzheimer's disease and they should not be driving, the DMV can take that report and act more sort of strongly on that information. They can, in fact, revoke driving privileges based on the physician's report. Most of the time, however, they don't. What happens is the doctor makes the report and then the DMV decides on how to proceed. And we'll talk more about this as we go along. But what I want you to understand is that the physician is a part of this process. They often are the one that sort of get the wheels moving with regard to getting somebody reevaluated or in fact getting driving privileges revoked. And that's how that works. But your physician can and should be a good collaborative partner in this process. We really want folks to not be afraid of talking to the doctor about their memory problems, about their changes to their field of vision. Doctors can work with you most doctors, frankly, don't want to be the bad guy or the bad gal that makes the report to the DMV. They don't really like being in that position. They don't enjoy that particular mandate and tricky spot that they are in. They want to be partners with their patients and with their patients' families. But of course, like all of us, they recognize that when somebody is not a safe driver, they should not continue to drive. So talk with your doctor about what they're seeing, why they're making the recommendations that they're making, because there's a lot of information they can include in that report to the DMV, or they can add lots of narrative description about their observations and whether or not they think the person should drive, or they can simply file the report. This person has received a diagnosis, and that's all that the report says. They're not required to do anything more than that. So we want you talking with the physician about what they're recommending and why they're recommending it, if at all possible. Now, keep in mind, we know that it can be hard for family caregivers to interact with physicians. If you don't have permission, right? We've got HIPAA laws in this country for a reason. People's health information is private, and if you've not been granted permission to speak with the person's doctor about their driving, keep in mind that you can always communicate one way, right? You can send information to the doctor. Here's what I've observed. Here's what I'm concerned. At his or her next appointment, I really hope that you will make a determination about whether or not you think that my loved one should continue to be driving. So bring the physician in to be a part of this conversation. If you're finding that the physician is not being a good partner, that happens. Sometimes they don't make that report. It's a law, but they're humans and they make mistakes. They may not have made the report. They may need to be reminded. You may not find that this is the right partner for you in terms of having these hard discussions about driving with your loved one. And if that's the case, find a different doctor, right? Our social workers at Alzheimer's San Diego can point you toward a new physician if you're in need of a referral to a specialist, for example, or a new primary care physician that's more attuned to these issues, of course, here in San Diego County. Along the lines of having the doctor be a collaborator and a facilitator, something that a lot of folks do is they actually ask the doctor to write a set of orders or to write a prescription regarding driving. Maybe something that can go up on the refrigerator, that can go up at the front door, the door to the garage, wherever might be useful to remind a person who's living with dementia that their doctor has recommended that they not drive, or that they not drive at night, for example. This will not work for everyone, but it is a useful tool for many families, right? If the person living with dementia has no recollection of that appointment with the doctor ever happening, then that order or that prescription is not going to be helpful, right? Because they don't remember that it happened. That's not a useful reminder tool. But for a lot of people, if a gentle reminder and nudge, a visual cue might provide that assistance, ask your doctor if that's something that they would be willing to do. The final point here is about insurance considerations. So I like to be very clear and very careful about how we talk about this. When I say that a doctor cannot take away a patient's driving privileges, I'm speaking very technically there, right? They don't have the authority to do that. But if a doctor says to someone, now I'm making this report to the DMV, and I do not feel that you should be driving because of the results of my evaluation, because of your current level of functioning, memory issues, vision issues, whatever it may be, I am recommending that you stop driving. That's in your medical record, right? Or in their medical record, some note of that conversation exists somewhere. And even though the physician can't take away driving privileges, if a person is in this gray area, and this happens a lot, the physician has made the report, the physician has said, I think you should stop driving, but technically they still have driving privileges, right? The DMV maybe hasn't given you the notification of revocation of driving privileges yet, or you are being called in for a reevaluation. Or the DMV just doesn't respond. That happens sometimes too. When the person is in that gray area, should they have an incident, an accident, heaven forbid, a fatality? Jean talked about the statistics around this. If that were to happen, even if the person is legal to be driving, right? They don't have restricted driving privileges, or they have not lost their driver's license, for example, but the insurance company can see that, right? A physician did say that they don't think that this person should be driving. The insurance company can absolutely and will refuse to pay out on a claim, putting a person at severe risk. Not only the severe risk of something bad happening, but then being financially, legally liable and responsible for that having happened. So even though it's technically true that doctors can't take away driving privileges, and technically that polling question was false, we still want you to listen to the physician's advice on that. So now let's talk about what happens on the DMV side of things. The DMV is really meant to protect driving privileges. Now, to a person with memory loss who has lost their driving privileges, it does not feel that way. And I certainly understand that. But their orientation really is to allow as many people to have driving privileges. If it's safe for you to be driving, they want you to be driving. The DMV is also not in the business of age discrimination. Just because you reach a certain age, just because you have a certain, well, in some cases, there are diagnoses. If you were legally blind, for example, that's an automatic revocation of driving privileges. But for the most part, a person's diagnosis of some type of memory loss, their age, these are not things that automatically disqualify somebody from being able to keep driving. We don't have a standard protocol for what happens. When the physician makes that report, the DMV gets that report, there's no sort of set, okay, well, this person is 80 years old and they have X diagnosis, so that means they get funneled into the group that lose driving privileges. This person is only 65 years old and their diagnosis is early stage, so they get to keep driving. There's no such set protocol. They make a person by person decision. And age has absolutely nothing to do with the DMV's decisions about driving. So some of you may yourself have had an experience that you're drawing from, or you may know somebody, right, who reached a certain age at which the DMV then started retesting that person every year instead of every 2 years or every 5 years. That does not mean that you will have the same experience or that the person that you're caring for will have the same experience. These decisions are not made based on the person's age. They are made based on that person's specific driving ability, as best as the DMV can know it, right? They don't always know the person's driving abilities. So there's lots of possible things that can happen once the doctor has made that report to the DMV. They often are going to not just automatically revoke driving privileges, as I said, unless the doctor made it very clear that they think that they should, or the DMV may receive that report and look back and see, boy, there's been a lot of moving violations. There's been a lot of driving problems in recent years. Then they get that doctor's report, and that's what they're going to do. They're going to make the decision to revoke driving privileges right there. But generally, that's not what happens. Usually what they're going to do is request that the person come in for a written test or a driving test, right? Unless, if the doctor didn't put strong language in the report indicating that the person is really unsafe and maybe they're due for renewal in 6 months. You might see the DMV completely disregard the report and not do anything, knowing that the person's going to have to come back in and get retested in just a few months. So you see, it's pretty loosey-goosey, right, with regard to what might happen. Requests for reexamination. So all of this, this is sort of the way that the DMV operates, but any one of us at any time can request that another person be reevaluated. So if you're sort of in that no man's land of, the doctor hasn't filed the report, or the doctor did file the report and it didn't produce any results, the DMV hasn't called the person in to request that they take a road test, for example, or the DMV hasn't responded at all. You, as a concerned person, you don't have to be law enforcement, you don't have to be a healthcare provider, you can request that that person be reevaluated. There's a form that you can download right from the DMV's website. Again, I'm speaking of the DMV of California here. Believe the number of that form is $6.99, but you can just search on their website to find that. And you can request that another person be reevaluated. This is a confidential form. The DMV is not going to tell the person who submitted the request, but it's not anonymous. You do have to tell them who you are and give them some information about what you've observed and why you are concerned. Doesn't mean the person's going to get retested. It doesn't mean that they're going to lose their driving privileges, but it is something that all of us can do if we're concerned and we feel like things aren't moving, or you need to kind of lay a paper trail of concern and documentation with the DMV. So do be aware that that is a resource available to absolutely everyone. We have something in the California DMV system called the Office of Driver Safety. So that is to say, when these things happen, when there's going to be an administrative hearing, for example, where the DMV calls in a driver who's lost their privileges, who wants to be heard, right, who wants to sort of argue or appeal that decision. When you are called in to take a road test or a written test after a diagnosis of dementia, for example, most of these things don't happen at our traditional DMV office, if that gives you any peace of mind. They happen at these offices of driver safety, which are smaller offices. There's much less going on there. They're a little sort of easier to navigate. The DMV will, of course, direct you to those locations, but you can also find their locations on the DMV website. So a hearing can be requested at any time. A person absolutely can appeal a decision that is made by the DMV any number of times, sort of infinitely. You can fight the DMV's decision as long as you want, for better or for worse, if you don't agree with the way that they have restricted or revoked one's driving privileges. And that's what they refer to as an administrative hearing. It's not all just black and white. You have driving privileges or you don't. They could also restrict a person's driver's license. We don't see this happen a lot in Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementia because they are progressive, right? They are expected to get worse over time. So typically we don't see it happen, but it could happen that they restrict a person to, no freeway driving, or only within 5 miles of your house, or only daytime driving, for example. Again, not common, but it certainly can happen. Again, I want to emphasize that driving privileges, licenses being taken away, as we say, can only happen by the DMV or by law enforcement. Right on the spot, police or sheriff or CHP can take away somebody's driving privileges right there on the spot if there were an incident and they were concerned. There is also a person designated to be an ombudsman, a representative of senior drivers, not necessarily drivers with dementia, but senior drivers here in the California DMV system. We've got their contact information for you toward the end of the program. Jean's going to be sharing some resources with you, and this is in there. But there is an ombudsman who represents several counties here in Southern California, who it is their job to provide information, to be a support, to be sort of an advocate for an older driver who feels that they have not been treated fairly by the DMV. So it's not uncommon. In fact, it's much more common that people don't agree within a family or within a support system about whether or not an individual person is safe to be driving. So there are outside resources for getting objective driver evaluations. These are usually done by rehab departments at hospitals or by private occupational therapists who specialize in this area. So they're called certified driver rehabilitation specialists. Again, most of them are occupational therapists by background. Again, Jean is going to be sharing some resources about local driver rehab programs that are out there. Now, keep in mind, most of these programs are oriented toward a person who's had an injury or an illness, and they need to recover and rehabilitate as a driver. And the concept of rehabilitation doesn't really apply in a progressive form of dementia like Alzheimer's disease, right? Again, it's not expected to get better, right? But a rehabilitation specialist, a certified driver rehabilitation specialist, is in a position to make an objective third-party evaluation about a person's current ability to drive safely, what modifications we might be able to make to the car, for example, to make it safer for somebody who maybe has got a limited field of vision, as Jean was describing, to make it safer for them to drive. It is also possible to just ask the DMV to evaluate someone, give me an on-the-road test and see if I can pass, right? The problem with that is that if you don't pass, you're losing your driving privileges. So most people don't want to do this, but do know that resource is available. The bottom line here, right? All of the rules aside, all of the loopholes aside, all of one's ability to self-advocate, to appeal a decision by the DMV, ultimately, when a person poses a risk because of Alzheimer's or another form of dementia, because of symptoms related to that condition, when a person it poses a risk to themselves or to others on the road, they have to stop driving. So that's what we're going to talk about now. Before you launch into the tricky terrain of having a conversation with someone about not driving anymore, I want to encourage you to engage in some sort of reflective thinking about what it would be like to stop driving. Most of you attending this webinar probably still are driving, have driving privileges. I certainly do. And I think that these are important thought exercises before we ask someone else to consider getting a driver evaluation, giving up their keys voluntarily, making transportation alternatives. We need to ask them to do it. It's really important. I call these the hornet's nest conversations. You got to just kick that hornet's nest and see what flies out. You might get stung. It might be a big, scary mess, but it's absolutely got to be done. You're going to have better luck. You're going to have a better experience, and so will they, as the person on the other side of that conversation, if you're coming to it with empathy and understanding. So that's what this is all about. Encourage everyone to practice being a passenger, to see what it's like to no longer drive, to no longer be in control. If you're the person in your household who always does the driving, encourage you to experience for yourself what it's like to not be that person anymore, and be a passenger. Restrict driving, right? See what it's like to not be able to drive at night or not to be able to drive on freeways. Reducing the need to drive. This is something we all should do. Limiting your trips, carpooling with people, building sources of social support so that other people can share driving responsibilities with you. See what that experience is like. You may actually find that you like it. You like having fewer trips that you need to make, or more social support to support you in reducing those trips or restricting your own driving. There is something out there called a driving agreement, sometimes referred to as a family contract. There's no official formal document for this. This is not a legally binding document, but you can find templates for these free and available for download all over the internet. And what these are sort of conversation points for families or for support systems. If I'm a person who's living with early dementia, I might complete an agreement and say in this document, okay, we're all in agreement right now that I'm still okay to be driving, but here's what we've agreed for the future, right? Next year, this time next year, I agree to have a reevaluation, right? With an OT who can evaluate my driving, or the next time I hit the mailbox, right? Whatever that thing might be for this individual person, you can develop an agreement or a family contract. Again, it is not a legally binding document, but it can be very helpful if you're the family member that's going to need to, okay, it's time, we gotta button down, we have to address, we have to kick that hornet's nest, right? It's time to take away mom's keys or my spouse's keys. It can be very helpful to those care partners emotionally, just to sort of know she may not agree with me now, but she did agree with me a year ago, right? That this would be a good decision. Explore your options for outside help. We'll be talking about finding resources, alternatives for transportation, and developing one's own personal transportation plan. Again, this is something we've got a resource for. It's very important that the conversation about not driving not just be about not driving, right? But instead that you're offering an alternative. I've done some research and here's what we're going to do instead. Right? So take a moment in the chat. If you haven't found the chat yet, open it up. And if you would, take a moment and tell us, what does driving mean to you? There's no right answer here. This isn't a true or false test. When you think about driving, and by the way, in the chat, please select all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your answers.
Freedom.
Freedom. Yeah. What else? What does driving mean to you?
I
Oh,
love the freedoms.
lots of freedom. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Independence. Getting where you want to
I
go.
see some themes. Getting where you want to go. Yeah. So practical, but right, that's really what it comes down to.
Yep.
Independence from other people, from
Yep.
family and friends. Being an adult. Yes, that's a big one. Yeah. Not being dependent on other people. Yes, that is a different concept than independence, right? If we think about that. Continuing to be who I have become. I love that. That's nicely put.
It's really true, because we really, put a lot of our personality and identity is intertwined or intermingled with our ability to drive, to
That's
just
right.
get in the vehicle and go out and do whatever it is we want to do.
That's right. It's a reflexive skill. Yeah, right. It's a great way to put it. Yeah. It's just something I know how to do, something in control, concept of self, a contributing member of society rather than a user, a recipient. Yeah. I'm going to pop up on the screen for you here. Please feel free to keep those coming. Oh, it's a source of entertainment, drag racing. I like it. Yeah. Gosh, these days things are drive-in movies and art events. Cars are a big deal.
And cars are, very important to lots of people. They,
That's right.
put lots of work into them, and time and cleaning and maintaining and so forth.
Yes. Yes. Here, the ability to meet my needs. Yeah, exactly. Your answer, power. These are such great answers, you guys. You see on the screen here what we hear from folks, and this is very much in line with what you feel. So next, I'll ask you to think about what you fear about not driving. Again, this is an exercise in empathy. So think about, you couldn't drive right now. Your car keys and your car are taken away forever and you can't drive anymore. What's your biggest fear? Being dependent, being stuck, becoming isolated. Yes. Anything else? I'll start popping up. Oh, being denied. Losing control of your day. Not being able to socialize. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to get groceries. It's hard to do stuff, especially in a big spread out county like ours, right? Yeah, being a bother to other people. Yes, that is the sense of being a burden, the worry about being a burden. These are the things we hear from people cut off from the world, right? Just like this lockdown. Yeah, we're all getting a little taste of what that would feel like, right? Yeah.
Means I'm officially old.
Ooh, yeah, that can be a hard thing to come to terms with, right? Yes. Wonderful. Thank you for indulging us in that exercise. It's really important that you come to the hard conversation about driving with some empathy and with some clarity about, what it is that we're going to do to address all of these fears, right? That you recognize what driving means to you and that you know what it means to them. And that you've done some thinking about, I know that you're concerned about being constrained, not being able to join in on your favorite social activities, right? For example, a loss of control. Being able to acknowledge that with the person goes a long way to overcoming their resistance during these conversations. I just want to make a quick note about, I don't know if you can, this one. Nope, is it not doing it? No, oops. Not sure you can see my cursor, but changing responsibilities, that's a really important one. A lot of caregivers are very resistant, reluctant to bringing this conversation up, not only because they fear resistance and anger on the part of the person losing driving privileges. But the hard reality that if I make you stop driving, I become the driver, right? That this puts a lot on my shoulders. That is a very real concern, and there's nothing selfish about thinking about that. In fact, I'd call it pretty healthy to be thinking through, well, my gosh, if I ask my mom to stop driving, or if I demand that my husband stop driving, then what am I going to do to make sure I can still manage my life, right? That's a good thing to be thinking about. So preparing for this conversation, think again about what it means to them, what it means to you, and what you know that they might fear about no longer driving. Really encourage you to keep a detailed written record of your observations of their driving. Remember that the lists that Jean went through of signs of problem driving, either that you've observed directly or that you sort of have indirectly observed or heard about. Keep a detailed written record of those, not to dump on the person and, present like evidence in a trial of some kind, but because this really helps you have clarity about what you've seen, about what you know to be true in that emotionally charged moment that you have to talk about this. You can pull up specific examples if they are needed to give you the confidence to kind of keep moving. To keep moving in that conversation. When it comes to observations too, I just want to say it's also really valuable to talk to other people about what they've observed. Jean talked about those passive observations, especially if you're not local, but even if you are local, talk to other people who know this person, other people who live nearby, see if they may really want to talk to you about what they've observed and may really welcome that conversation. It can be really helpful to kind of get feedback from other people, just as sort of a check on yourself too, right? Maybe I'm overreacting to how problematic his or her driving is. Do your research in advance. Again, we want to be having this conversation coming from a place of abundance is not quite the word I'm looking for, but I'm not finding the right word, but that we're not just talking about taking away, but that we're talking about, okay, it's not safe for you to be driving anymore, but I do not want for you to be dependent on me. I do not want for you to be isolated. So I've done some research and here are our alternatives. We know that public transportation is limited at best and very difficult, especially for people with cognitive impairment to navigate. But we do have some great transportation resources here in San Diego County, which we'll be sharing with you. We can put a plan in place. And finally, get support for the conversation itself. You don't have to do this by yourself, right? You can rely on members of our clinical services team to help you sort of plan for, or we're not professional mediators, but you can hire a mediator. But our social workers can sort of be a part of facilitating family conversations. You can hire professionals, care managers, or mediators, in fact, if the conversation is going to get real messy and real difficult. But know that we're here. We have information we can share with you. Sometimes having some documentation about driving and transportation alternatives can be hugely helpful to starting the conversation. Remember, whatever resistance you're feeling to starting the conversation, personal and public safety is always more important than any one person's emotional state. So it's easy for me to say it, but we really have to have the courage to kick the hornet's nest, to have the hard conversation, right? When I talk about any one person's emotional state here, I'm talking about both of you, both parties in this conversation, right? The person who may be angry about losing driving privileges or who doesn't understand why they're losing their license or their abilities. But also your own emotional state. Sometimes we're putting off the conversation for our own reasons, right? This is uncomfortable. I don't want to be in this role with my loved one. Right? So safety is always more important. What can we do to take action? Request that reexamination from the DMV if you're not getting what you need from the physician. Controlling the person's access to the car and the keys. for a lot of people with dementia, out of sight really can be out of mind, right? If the car is not parked in the driveway, if it's not right there in the garage, if the keys aren't sitting right where they always sit, sometimes the person, because they're not seeing it, because it's not right there in their line of sight, they're not thinking about driving anymore. Again, not universally true, but this can be hugely helpful. Removing the car, right? Having somebody else keep it at their house if it's not going to be in use or you don't want it to be in use, or even disabling the car, right? Doesn't seem to be working, right? Because the battery is disconnected, for example, or rekeying. It's actually pretty expensive to rekey a car now with the fobs that we use, but that may be an alternative in your situation. It's extreme, of course, and we want to avoid it at all costs, but sometimes we have to just contact law enforcement. All right, my loved one is unsafe on the road and they just left. Here's where I think they were going. Here's what the car looks like. Here's the driver's, the license plate, right? Contacting law enforcement in the same way that we might do if somebody were driving under the influence of a substance, for example. Underlying all of this, of course, is the need to know what the transportation alternatives are. So very generally, again, we'll get into some specifics here in a minute, but generally speaking, here are the categories of transportation alternatives that are out there. We have what are called demand responsive services, meaning things like taxis, Uber, and Lyft. GoGo Grandparent, if you're not familiar with this particular resource, it's very cool. It's sort of a Lyft or Uber alternative for people that don't use smartphones. So you can set up an account so that way a person can just call for a ride in an Uber or a Lyft using their regular telephone, either a landline or a non-smart smartphone, or a non-smartphone, or just it doesn't work through an app. It just works through the telephone system. But you as a care partner can be set up as a person who sort of keeps tabs on, requests for trips that get placed. You get notified via text or through the app when somebody is picked up, when they've made it safely to their destination, the identity of the driver, for example. It's a pretty neat app. This was actually developed by some local students here in San Diego several years ago. There is also something called the Paratransit system in San Diego proper. This is run through MTS, the Metropolitan Transit System, but there are sort of partner paratransit systems in all areas of the county. There's the North County Transit District. There are several different regions. I'm not a transit expert, but several different regions of paratransit. What paratransit is a program that exists. It runs in parallel. Paratransit runs in parallel to our public transportation program, and it's for people who have disabilities that make it difficult for them to use public transportation. So clearly somebody with memory loss, vision impairment, disorientation, confusion is not going to be able to use bus timetables or maybe walk safely independently to their closest bus stop, for example. So the paratransit system, one has to apply for it to get certified as disabled. It takes some time, but it's not an onerous or difficult process, but there's lots of paperwork. It's a bureaucratic process. But once you're certified as having a disability and a cognitive disability counts, you're qualified to use the paratransit system. And that way this is why it's a demand responsive service. You can call and request a ride rather than relying on a bus or a train, right? That has its own schedule. That's what we mean by demand responsive. You can't just call MTS Paratransit, the access program, and say, I need a ride right now, the way that you can with a taxi or an Uber or GoGo Grandparent. You arrange it for a few days in advance, but it is at your schedule, right? And it's door to door. They're not just dropping you off at the closest stop, for example, the way that a bus would. They're taking you to your specific location. The drivers are trained and they can help the person walk to and from where they're going. There are many nonprofit and local sort of volunteer services Of course, we have to keep in mind many of these services are currently not operational because of the pandemic. So you need to contact them and see how they're currently working. But senior services, senior centers, for example, in many regions have volunteer driver programs. There are many nonprofit organizations here in town that have transportation services. Again, Jean's going to walk you through some specific organizations. Don't hesitate to reach out to a particular provider of services and ask what transportation options are available. An adult day program, the YMCA, a healthcare provider, a doctor's office. Sometimes they have transportation services, but they're not widely advertising because they don't have a lot of capacity. But my mom really loves coming to her swimming program at the Y. What are the transportation options that serve your location? They may have a list for you. Private transportation services, of course, you can always hire a non-medical in-home care provider or a private driver to drive somebody places. And then again, of course, the natural support system, family, friends, neighbors, all of us who do that sort of informal driving. Okay, so Marcy, we have a few minutes here.
Okay, I have a few questions. So
Great.
one I want to grab out of the chat really fast before it goes away. In terms of the hornet nest conversation,
Yeah.
how do you open this conversation with somebody that will forget my suggestions after 20 seconds?
Jean, I'll start that one, but feel free to chime in if you have any other comments. I would say be realistic about what the person can absorb in this conversation and whether or not they're going to remember it. Right? You don't have to have this conversation 30 times. You need to have it, right? Give them the benefit of the dignity and the opportunity to hear what you're saying. But remember, you have to remember that they may not remember, and be realistic about that. They may not have any insight to their own memory loss or their own problems. And so having the conversation repeatedly may not work. It is always worth the endeavor of bringing the person in and making this decision about what we're going to do together. But that's not always realistic. Sometimes you got to just step in, you got to take action, and the person is not going to be a part of the decision-making process with you.
Okay,
And
thanks.
I
Amy.
agree. And I would just say, sometimes in these cases, we want to give families and care partners the latitude to use what we call therapeutic fibbing. So in this case, to somebody who doesn't remember 20 seconds after, to be telling them they're not a safe driver is maybe a conversation that's just non-productive. So maybe it's just that, the car broke down or insurance rates have gone through the roof, or, it's about, there's something else. There's another reason for why we have to make this change.
Thanks, Amy and Jean. The next question is kind of a clarification question about whether or not a physician is mandated to report MCI. The person asking the question thought that it was only when it has progressed to dementia.
Yes, technically that's true. Physicians can report a person with MCI out of concern. It is not a requirement.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then another question is, can the person being tested request a verbal test from the DMV instead of a written test, I'm assuming?
Oh, that's a really excellent question.
Mhm.
And I'm sorry to say, I don't know the answer to that. Jean, do you?
I don't either.
I would imagine so, however, in the name of, the ADA and accessibility, I would suspect there is an alternative format that's available, but I'm sorry to say that I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, we'll have to look into that.
Yes, we will.
Okay, great. And then the last one I have for you is, I think this came up with, again, the kind of the hornet's nest conversation. It's keeping a list may imply spying and bringing a negative response immediately, but this is, I think, the more of the question. Bringing up the driving issues later may be worthless because they don't remember or deny the issue. So why wait? Should the issue be addressed almost right away or safely?
I mean, if that's possible, absolutely. I think all feedback is more valuable when it's given right away. That's not always possible for everybody, right? For if you're a long distance caregiver, for example, or depending on the person's resistance or their perception of their own abilities, you may need to kind of build a case. But absolutely, if you have the opportunity to give feedback right in that moment, that's when it should be given. Yes.
And I would agree with that. It's again, your people best. There's no kind of one right way or wrong way to do this. You have to trust your own instincts a little bit in terms of the fact that you do know your person, and go with the approach and the discussion that's you think is going to be most effective with your person.
Okay. Do we have time for one kind
Sure.
of short one? Okay. So in terms of indications of when somebody might have some driving concerns, is not finding the dash dimmer switch for several weeks perhaps a bad indication?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's an interesting example. I'd say, Jean, tell me if you disagree with this, but I think it sort of depends on the person's kind of previous level of functioning. If you ask me right now to find the dimmer switch on my dashboard, I would struggle. It would take me not weeks, but it would take me some time. I'd say if that's a thing the person knew how to do before, this is a familiar car, they've done it before, and they're losing that ability, that would be a concern. If it's, a person struggling to figure out the wipers in a rental car, or they're borrowing someone else's car, or driving a car they're not familiar with, and they can't figure out where the controls are, we cut them a little more slack. But I don't know, Jean, I mean, maybe that's a more universal thing than I'm aware of, but.
No, I would agree with you. It's like all, degrees of importance. The dimmer switch, but knowing how to put the headlights on or the turn signal on, important.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a true fact is I was actually at the DMV for what the heck was it? I don't know what it was I had to do, why I had to go there, but it was for a vehicle thing. And I had to open the hood of my vehicle. I couldn't find the darn thing under the dash. And of course, the DMV people are not allowed to do anything for you. So he just stood there and I just felt like an idiot. So this kind gentleman from one lane over came over and helped me. It was just way tucked up, kind of high in the dash. So, just that's an example of, if these are features that are only used occasionally, they're not super important to the safe operation of the vehicle, I wouldn't worry about it too much.
But it is really person specific, right? I mean, if a person really knows their car, they would know where all those controls are, and they lose that ability. As Jean was saying in her description of, what sets normal age-related memory loss apart from dementia, it's that significant change from what's normal for them, right? It's interfering with daily function, not being able to find the windshield wipers at this time of year, right? That's going to be a serious impediment to safe driving.
Yep.
Great, thank you. That's all we have for now.
Okay.
All right, Amy, I'm just going to try this business of slides one more time and nope. Craziest thing. Okay, so I'm going to talk about local transportation resources. I'm going to go fairly quickly through these things. And again, just to remind everyone, we're going to be emailing you a copy of the slide deck. And so you will get these websites. So don't panic about things. So the Metropolitan Transit System, MTS, there's the ADARide.com. This is, fairly low cost. It's curb to curb service, wheelchair equipped. I believe you need to reserve a couple of days in advance. And actually what I should have said before I started, with all of these resources, you know, they're all following with daily cleaning through the vehicles and such in accordance with guidelines, CDC guidelines with COVID-19. And you are required to wear a mask when you're in these vehicles, as are other passengers potentially, and the driver too. The Paratransit database, which is FactSD for San Diego.org, is really cool because it's a database that encompasses all the kind of different transportation options throughout the county and specific to your area. So you put in, for example, your zip code, and it'll pull up all the different transit options for you in your zip code. Now they are, you know, then you have to search through them. So for example, some of them might be a free transportation system for people going to chemotherapy appointments. So you have to look through them to see precisely, you know, what transportation resources are applicable to you. But it's really well done database. Ride Fact at, again, factsd.org, and then the rest of the URL, is serving all cities in San Diego County, and also Ramona and Spring Valley as well too. And reservations can be made for this particular type of service for seniors that are 60 plus, and it's available 7 days a week as well too. Jewish Family Services has their on-the-go transportation programs, which includes Rides and Smiles, Navigator, and some other ones as well too. And if you go to their website, that'll give you all the different options that are available. Amy talked a little bit about, you know, they've got it's like enhanced Lyft and Uber for our seniors and for our people with experiencing memory loss and dementia. And so for driver evaluation resources, what we have here up at the top is the American Occupational Therapy Association. So this is a good place to go to, not only for great information, but also to be able to find occupational therapists in your area who may be offering driver evaluations and or trainings in vehicles. So that's a good place to go to. The local driver evaluation programs that we have operating presently are through Scripps, and that is through Scripps Encinitas, in Scripps Memorial Encinitas, and also the SHARP Adapted Driving Program. So those are the two programs that are currently operating. Well, there was another program, driver evaluation rehabilitation program at Tri-City Medical Center in Oceanside, but that program has been closed down for the time being. So that's what we have for those. And now additionally, we have, of course, the DMV, and you can go online and or you can call. And Amy referenced, it is Form 699, the request for driver reexamination. And then you can also get the senior driver guide. You can contact the Ombudsman program to talk about concerns that you may have about yourself or someone you care about and whose potentially driver's license is being revoked, or you've got concerns about the process that is going on with regards to driving skill and having the driver's license revoked. AARP, of course, has some great driver safety programs, so have a look at those, as does the AAA, American Automobile Association. And have a look at those. It's everything from just, they can also do kind of an assessment in terms of how you're actually even sitting in the vehicle, and if you're seat is high enough up and if your mirrors are at the right angles based on, what you're physically able to do at this point in time. And then there's the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, their Older Drivers Information Center. And this is kind of an underutilized resource. There's some great information there as well too. So I would suggest checking out any of these websites for tips and tidbits in terms of having these conversations, the kicking of the hornet's nest. They do have, many of them do have tips for these conversations, and as well as additional good information with regards to safety. I also just want to mention with the DMV that California DMV is offering eligible drivers who are 70 years of age plus the option to renew your driver's license online, as long as it's a non-commercial driver's license, online during this COVID pandemic. So that's something the DMV has stepped up to be able to do for our people 70 plus who need to renew your driver's license and don't want to get down there and be in the massive crowds at the DMV. Additional information, then advocacy information, freewheeling after 60. This is a private organization that offers personalized transportation planning for couples, for families, for individuals. And it can be a good resource to go to and might feel for some folks less like son or daughter is kind of just taking my independence away from me, and rather that this is a plan that I'm developing together with this professional for when I am no longer driving. So it might have some appeal and make it a little bit easier for some folks. The Hartford Center for Mature Market Excellence. They have some really good booklets on a variety of topics, and one of them is driving. And for sure, have a look at their website to have a look at that particular booklet that you can you can download. I believe you're also able to just order it so that it's mailed out to you. Plus, they also have booklets on other good things as well too, like disaster planning and I can't remember some other good things as well too. The National Aging and Disability Transportation Center, another really great resource, as is the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. So have a look at those and see what you can find out. And now we are starting to wrap up here, and Amy's going to come back on. And she actually is going to wrap up for us.
Yeah, so just a quick introduction to our organization and ways that we can support you in identifying these local transportation alternatives, or supporting you as a person who's living with memory loss or as a care partner in general. Alzheimer's San Diego is a local nonprofit organization. We only serve San Diego County. We're headquartered in Kearny Mesa. We serve people throughout the county with Alzheimer's disease or not, right? Whether there's a diagnosis, whatever the diagnosis may be, or even if it's just undiagnosed memory or cognitive impairment, all of our services and supports are available for free. If you live here in the county or you support somebody who does. So feel free, reach out to us via our dementia experts. They're sort of the place to start. This is our social work team, our clinical services team, who can answer questions, connect you to resources, either some of our internal programs or to resources that are available out in the community. Marcy, I'll ask if you could send the social work, there it is, the social work request form. If you fill that out, let us know the best way to reach you, and a member of our clinical services team will reach out and connect you to any of the resources that Jean was talking about here today, or anything else that you might need. We've got an array of support groups that are currently meeting virtually. Clearly, you found our online education program. We offer programs at least weekly on a wide variety of topics for people living with memory loss as well as care partners. We have volunteers like Tyan, who's with us here today, members of our tech team who are available to help you with setting up FaceTime or virtual visits, using any of our, if you're interested in joining our social activities programs, joining a support group, coming to more classes, engaging with one of our virtual ALS companions, and the technology is a little intimidating. That's what our volunteers are here for. So reach out, let us know. We can connect you with someone who can help you get all set up. What have I not mentioned? We have counseling services available through licensed clinical social workers to provide individual one-on-one counseling support to care partners. We have our Vitals, Volunteers in Touch telephone reassurance program for people with dementia who are currently living alone and are in need of a telephone contact to check in, socialize, chit chat, but also to provide helpful reminders of things if that's needed. And then just a quick note, we do also have a lovely supply of reusable cloth face coverings, which we still need to keep using. Even though the stay-at-home order has been lifted, we need those, and vaccines are coming, right? We still need to be keeping each other safe. If your supply is getting a little bit ratty and you could use some new ones, let us know. We'll mail some out to you. So you can reach us through our website. You can send us an email. You can even live chat us, a little box that pops up when you visit our website. Reach us anytime, Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 5. Our dementia experts are available by phone, email, or you can use that request form that Marcy put out in the chat just now. Couple of upcoming education programs. So just want to make sure you know about. Next week, Jean and I will be holding, it's kind of like office hours, we call it. It's an open door education hour. It will just sort of be available hanging out in a Zoom meeting. If you have questions, if you watch one of our webinars, a recorded version of our webinars, and you have a question, or you have more questions about the content we talked about here today. It's held via Zoom meetings, so we can see each other and talk to each other directly. Anyone is welcome to pop in and join us for that. And next Friday, February 5th, we will have local attorney Yvonne Amrine speaking on legal and financial basics, specific to the legal and financial needs of people who are dealing with a dementia diagnosis. So we would love to have your feedback on this program. As soon as we close this webinar, which we'll be doing in just a moment here, you'll be taken to a link to a real short survey. We'd love your feedback. It is anonymous and it is used. We read them, we appreciate them, and we try to incorporate as many improvements as we can. And if you have suggestions on other topics you'd like to learn about, we're always open to any suggestions. So we will be emailing out a copy of these program materials and some additional resources here shortly this afternoon, and a recording of this program, assuming the recording came out okay. The recording will be available in our webinar library in the next few days. We'll get that up. So just check back there if you want to rewatch or share it with someone else. So with that, I will wrap things up, and I thank you for joining us here today. Thank you for participating with us and thinking thoughtfully and empathetically about these difficult but important issues. We're glad that you were here. Please reach out and let us know if we can be of further support.
Take care, everyone. Thanks for joining us today.